The crack of lightning split the sky as Clara Sinclair stood trembling on the auction block, her auburn hair plastered to her face by the pouring rain. It was 1876 in Casa Grande, Arizona Territory, and her life had been reduced to this terrible moment, being sold to the highest bidder like cattle or supplies. $500 for the woman. Called out Herbert Dawson, the slave trader who'd captured her after ambushing the stagecoach 2 weeks prior. A fine specimen, educated, can cook, clean, and read, who'll start the bidding. Clara struggled against the ropes binding her wrists, her green eyes scanning the crowd for any hint of mercy. The traveling auction had drawn a rough assortment of miners, drifters, and local ranchers seeking cheap labor. Most were seeking workers for their claims or homesteads, not caring much how they came by them. The law was distant in these parts, and human trafficking still persisted despite the abolition of slavery. 300, called a grizzled miner with tobacco-stained teeth. 350, countered a red-faced rancher. Thunder boomed overhead as the storm intensified, making several bidders edge toward shelter. Clara's heart raced. If the auction dispersed, what would become of her? Would Dawson simply take her farther into the wilderness? 400, came a deep voice from the back of the crowd. The bidders parted, revealing a tall figure astride a powerful black stallion. His face was partially obscured by the brim of his hat, but Clara could see he was younger than most men present, perhaps 30. His posture was rigid, his jaw set firm beneath several days of stubble. A long duster coat whipped around him in the wind, revealing glimpses of worn leather chaps and a holstered Colt revolver. "We have 400 from Mr. Tucker Wallace," announced Dawson, recognizing the rider. "Do I hear 450? The miner opened his mouth to counter, but another lightning bolt cracked so close that several horses reared in panic. 500. Tucker Wallace called over the thunder, his voice betraying no emotion. Herbert Dawson glanced nervously at the darkening sky. 500 going once, twice. He scanned the crowd, but the storm had frightened off most bidders. Sold to Mr. Wallace. Before Clara could process what was happening, the cowboy had thrown a leather pouch of coins to Dawson and ridden directly to the auction block. In one fluid motion, he leaned down, grasped her by the waist, and pulled her up across his saddle. "Wait," she began to protest. But Tucker Wallace had already wheeled his horse around and was spurring it into a gallop, riding away from Casa Grande as rain poured from the heavens and lightning continued to fracture the sky. Clara could only cling to the saddle horn as the town shrank into the distance, wondering what manner of fate awaited her with this silent, imposing stranger. They rode for nearly an hour through the downpour, the cowboy maintaining a relentless pace that put considerable distance between them and Casa Grande. Clara's dress was soaked through, her fingers numb from cold and from gripping the saddle. Still, her new owner said nothing. When they finally stopped beneath a rocky overhang offering some shelter, Tucker Wallace dismounted in one smooth motion, then reached up to help her down. His touch wasn't rough, but it wasn't gentle either. It was efficient, like everything else about him. "Turn around," he said, his first words since the auction. Clara stiffened, terror flooding her veins. "Please, sir, to cut your bindings," he clarified, his tone even. He produced a hunting knife from his belt. Reluctantly, she presented her bound wrists. With surprising delicacy, he sliced through the ropes, careful not to nick her skin. As circulation returned painfully to her hands, Clara rubbed her raw wrists and studied her purchaser properly for the first time. Tucker Wallace stood over 6 feet tall, with shoulders broadened by years of hard work. His eyes were a striking shade of blue that contrasted with his sun-weathered skin and dark brown hair. A scar ran along his jawline, disappearing into the stubble on his cheek. He looked dangerous, capable, and utterly unreadable. "Why did you buy me?" Clara finally asked, summoning her courage. He began unsaddling his horse. "Dawson's an animal trader, not a slave trader. What he's doing is illegal." "That didn't answer my question." Tucker secured his saddle under the overhang, then removed a canteen and offered it to her. "Drink, you're dehydrated." She accepted it cautiously, taking small sips of the lukewarm water. "Are you going to tell me where we're going, what you expect of me?" He turned back to his saddlebags and retrieved a bundle of jerky. "We're going to my ranch about 20 miles northeast of here, as for what I expect." He paused, finally meeting her eyes directly. "Nothing that you're fearing. I'm taking you away from that auction. Once we reach my property, you can decide what you want to do next." Clara blinked in confusion. You're not keeping me," a shadow crossed his face. "I don't keep people, Miss Sinclair, Clara Sinclair, Miss Sinclair." He nodded once. "No one owns you, not Dawson, not me, not anyone." Relief washed over her, but confusion quickly followed. "Then why spend $500? Tucker's expression hardened. "Because I've seen what happens to women sold at those auctions. My mother was one of them." The thunder had faded to a distant rumble as they settled in for the night, both silently acknowledging they couldn't continue in the dark. Tucker built a small fire beneath the overhang where the smoke could escape through a natural chimney in the rock. Clara sat with her back against the stone, trying to dry her dress by the meager warmth. "You haven't told me your story," she said quietly. Tucker fed another stick into the flames. "Not much to tell. You just spent $500 to rescue a stranger." "There's a story there, Mr. Wallace." His eyes reflected the dancing firelight. "Tucker, just Tucker." "Tucker, then," he sighed, settling back against his saddle. "My mother was sold to a silver miner when I was 8. Before that, we lived in Kansas, had a small farm. My father died in the war. We couldn't make the payments, lost everything." His voice remained even, but Clara detected the undercurrent of old pain. "We headed west, hoping for a fresh start, got ambushed outside Albuquerque." Clara wrapped her arms around her knees. "What happened?" "Man named Crenshaw bought her. I was sold to a different outfit ranch outside Tucson. Worked there until I was 17, then lit out to find her." His jaw tightened. "Found Crenshaw's mining camp 3 years too late. She died from consumption the winter before." "I'm so sorry," Clara whispered. Tucker didn't acknowledge her sympathy. "Been buying people at these illegal auctions when I can afford it, setting them free." He looked at her directly. "How'd you end up on that block?" Clara pushed a damp strand of hair behind her ear. "I was a school teacher in St. Louis. My father passed last year, left more debts than assets. I accepted a position at a new school in Tucson." She swallowed hard. "The stagecoach was ambushed 2 weeks ago. The driver was killed. Dawson and his men took me and 2 others." "The others?" "An elderly Chinese man and a young Mexican woman. They were sold before me in Maricopa." Her voice cracked. "I tried to help them, but—" "One person can't fight an outfit like Dawson's alone," Tucker said quietly. They fell silent, listening to the rain that had settled into a steady patter. Clara studied her rescuer, realizing there was much more beneath his stoic exterior than she'd initially perceived. "You could have been killed," she said suddenly. "Dawson had armed men there. You rode in alone, took me and rode out." Tucker's mouth twitched in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "Dawson knows better than to cross me. I've got friends in these parts, people who have helped me put some of his associates behind bars. You work with the law, sometimes, when they are honest." He tossed another stick into the fire. "Get some sleep, Miss Sinclair. We've got a long ride tomorrow." Clara awoke at first light to find Tucker already saddling his horse. The storm had passed, leaving behind a freshly washed desert landscape. The air smelled of wet creosote and sage. "Here," he said, handing her a piece of jerky and a biscuit from his provisions. "It's not much. Thank you." Clara accepted the simple breakfast gratefully. After 2 weeks of near starvation under Dawson's custody, even trail rations tasted wonderful. "How far to your ranch?" "We'll be there by midday if we make good time." Tucker checked his cinch, then helped her mount before swinging up behind her. The proximity was unavoidable on a single horse, and Clara found herself acutely aware of his chest against her back, his arms reaching around her to hold the reins. Despite her initial fear of him, she now felt strangely safe in his presence. They rode in companionable silence for several hours, the landscape gradually changing from desert flats to rolling hills dotted with mesquite and cottonwoods. Water from the recent storm had awakened dormant wildflowers, splashing the terrain with unexpected color. "It's beautiful here," Clara remarked, breaking the silence. "It can be," Tucker agreed. "Harsh but honest. The land doesn't lie to you or make promises it can't keep. Unlike people." His arms tensed slightly around her. "Most people." As the sun climbed higher, Tucker pointed toward a distant mesa. My land starts at that ridgeline. Ranch house is in the valley beyond. Clara squinted, making out a thin column of smoke rising from beyond the ridge. Someone's there. My foreman, Diego, and his wife, Lucia, they manage things when I'm away. He hesitated. They're good people. They'll help you get situated until we can arrange transport to wherever you want to go. The thought of leaving produced an unexpected pang in Clara's chest. You'd pay for that, too. I would. Why are you doing all this for me? Tucker was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he said, because no one did it for my mother. They crested the ridge an hour later, revealing a modest but well-maintained ranch spread below. A two-story house of whitewashed adobe stood near a small creek, flanked by a barn, corral, and several outbuildings. A handful of ranch hands were visible working with cattle in a distant pasture. It wasn't the largest operation Clara had seen, but everything appeared orderly and purposeful. Wallace Ranch, Tucker said simply as they descended the trail. As they approached the main house, a middle-aged Mexican man emerged from the barn, shading his eyes against the sun. Upon recognizing Tucker, he broke into a wide smile and called something in Spanish to the house. A woman appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. Diego and Lucia Rivera, Tucker explained. They came with the ranch when I bought it 5 years ago, more family than employees now. They dismounted in the yard, and Diego hurried over to greet them, his expression shifting to concern when he saw Clara's disheveled state. "Senor Tucker," he said, his English heavily accented but clear. "We were not expecting you for another week." "Change of plans," Tucker replied, clapping the man on the shoulder. "This is Miss Clara Sinclair. She'll be our guest for a while." Lucia had approached and immediately took charge, clucking sympathetically at Clara's condition. "Come, señorita, you need food, bath, clean clothes." She shot Tucker a questioning look, but he merely nodded, and she guided Clara toward the house. "Diego," Tucker called after them, "have Jose ride into town. Tell Sheriff Matthews I've got information about Dawson's operation." Clara allowed herself to be led inside, overwhelmed by the sudden shift in her circumstances. 24 hours ago, she had been bound and awaiting sale like livestock. Now she was being ushered into a comfortable ranch house by a kind woman who was already promising hot water and clean bedding. The house was surprisingly comfortable inside, simple but clean, with sturdy furniture and colorful textiles that softened the frontier austerity. Lucia showed her to a small bedroom on the second floor, then bustled off to heat water for a bath. Left alone briefly, Clara moved to the window. Below in the yard, she could see Tucker and Diego in serious conversation, the foreman nodding as Tucker gestured in the direction they had come from. Despite his apparent desire to be rid of her as quickly as possible, Clara couldn't help feeling drawn to this complex man who risked his life saving strangers. The next several days established a rhythm Clara hadn't experienced since before her father's death. She ate regular meals at the kitchen table with Lucia, who chattered in a mix of English and Spanish as she worked. Tucker was often absent, riding out early and returning late, sometimes accompanied by men Clara didn't recognize, once including a stern-faced man wearing a sheriff's badge. On her fourth evening at the ranch, Clara was sitting on the front porch enjoying the sunset when Tucker joined her. He settled into the adjacent rocking chair without speaking, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. "Lucia says you've been helping in the kitchen," he finally said. Clara nodded. "It seemed the least I could do. She's been very kind." "You don't need to earn your keep, Miss Sinclair, Clara," she corrected him. "And I'm not trying to earn anything. I simply prefer to be useful." He nodded once, accepting this. "Sheriff Matthews says the stage line can arrange passage to Tucson whenever you're ready. The school board has been notified of your situation." Clara's heart sank unexpectedly. "Oh, that's good news." Tucker glanced at her, his expression unreadable in the fading light. "Unless you've changed your mind about Tucson?" "No, it's just..." She searched for words. "Everything happened so quickly, I'm still adjusting to the idea of freedom again." He studied her for a long moment. "Take all the time you need, there's no rush." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a rider, galloping hard up the road to the ranch. Tucker rose immediately, his hand instinctively moving to his sidearm. The rider reined in sharply. It was Jose, one of the younger ranch hands, his face flushed with exertion. Senor Wallace. Riders coming 6, maybe 7 men, armed. Tucker's expression hardened. Dawson, Jose nodded. Recognized Hank Miller with them. They're maybe 15 minutes behind me. Tucker turned to Clara, his voice urgent but controlled. Get inside, tell Lucia what's happening, she knows what to do. Fear gripped Clara's heart. What about you? I'll handle this. His eyes softened momentarily. I won't let them take you back, Clara, I promise. Inside, the house erupted into controlled chaos. Lucia led Clara to a hidden cellar accessed through a trapdoor in the pantry. Underground railroad, she explained as they descended. Senor Tucker has helped many people. The cellar was small but well stocked with water, blankets, and even a few books. A narrow tunnel extended from one side, presumably providing an emergency exit. Clara could hear muffled sounds of preparation above men's voices, footsteps, the metallic sounds of weapons being readied. Will there be fighting? She asked Lucia, who had insisted on staying with her. The older woman's face was grim. Senor Tucker will try to avoid it. But these men, they are not good men, they do not respect the law. It's my fault, Clara whispered. I've brought danger to your home. Lucia took her hand firmly. No, the danger comes from evil men who think they can own others. Senor Tucker fights this evil for many years now. Above them, the sounds of approaching horses reached their ears, followed by Tucker's voice, calm but carrying. That's far enough, Dawson. You stole my property, Wallace, came the reply, the slave trader's voice instantly recognizable to Clara. I've come to collect what's mine. The woman isn't property. What you're doing is illegal, Dawson laughed. Law's pretty flexible out here, as you well know. I've got a bill of sale for that schoolteacher. A bill of sale you forced her to sign under duress, Tucker replied evenly. Sheriff Matthews is building a case against you. Right now, you're trespassing on private property. I suggest you leave. Funny thing about the sheriff, he had an unfortunate accident this morning. Won't be building cases against anyone for a while. Clara felt her blood run cold. Lucia crossed herself, murmuring a prayer. Last warning, Dawson. Tucker's voice had dropped to a dangerous register. Get off my land. The sound of a gunshot split the air, followed immediately by a volley of fire. Clara flinched, instinctively covering her ears. Lucia put an arm around her shoulders, pulling her away from the trapdoor. The gunfire continued sporadically for what seemed like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then came the sound of running footsteps, shouts, breaking glass. Something heavy crashed directly overhead, and dust sifted down from between the floorboards. They're in the house, Lucia whispered. Clara's mind raced. If Dawson's men found them, Lucia would be in danger too. Her eyes fell on the tunnel extending from the cellar. We should go, she whispered back. Lucia shook her head. Senor Tucker said to stay here. But if they find us, the trapdoor suddenly flew open, flooding the cellar with light. Clara tensed, prepared to confront Dawson or one of his men, but it was Diego who appeared at the opening, blood streaming from a cut on his forehead. Come quickly, he urged. The house is burning, we must go now. They scrambled up the ladder to find the kitchen already filling with smoke. Diego led them through the dining room toward the back door, skirting a body on the floor, one of Dawson's men. Clara realized with shock. Outside, chaos reigned. The front of the house was engulfed in flames, illuminating the yard where several men lay motionless. Gunfire still echoed from the direction of the barn. Diego hurried them toward the creek, where the ranch's women and children were already gathered behind the protection of a stone wall. Where's Tucker? Clara demanded, scanning the scene desperately. Diego pointed toward the barn. Still fighting. Dawson has 3 men left. Without thinking, Clara started in that direction, but Diego caught her arm. No, señorita, it is too dangerous. I can't just hide while people die because of me. She wrenched free of his grip and ran toward the barn, keeping low and using the smokehouse for cover. As she neared the barn, she could hear men shouting inside. A shot rang out, followed by a cry of pain that sent fear spearing through her heart. Peering through a gap in the wooden slats, she saw Tucker crouched behind a stack of hay bales, blood staining his left sleeve. Opposite him, Herbert Dawson and two remaining men were working their way around different sides of the barn, attempting to flank him. Clara looked around frantically for something to help. Her eyes fell on a lantern hanging just inside the barn door, if she could create a distraction. Moving silently, she eased the door open just enough to reach the lantern. Taking a deep breath, she grabbed it, lit it with trembling hands, and threw it hard toward the opposite end of the barn from where Tucker was positioned. The lantern shattered against a support post, oil splashing across a pile of empty grain sacks that immediately caught fire. Dawson and his men turned toward the sudden blaze, momentarily distracted. It was all the advantage Tucker needed. He fired twice in rapid succession, dropping both of Dawson's remaining men. Before Dawson himself could react, Tucker was on him, tackling him to the ground and sending his gun skittering across the dirt floor. "Clara, get out," Tucker shouted, wrestling with the slave trader. The fire's spreading, she hesitated, torn between fleeing to safety and helping Tucker. Dawson had managed to draw a knife and was slashing wildly, catching Tucker across the cheek. Clara's eyes fell on a heavy pitchfork leaning against a nearby stall. Grabbing it, she approached from behind Dawson as he raised the knife for another strike. With all her strength, she brought the handle down across his forearm. Bone cracked audibly, and Dawson howled in pain, the knife falling from his suddenly useless hand. Tucker seized the moment to land a devastating blow to Dawson's jaw, knocking him unconscious. Breathing hard, he looked up at Clara with a mixture of anger and admiration. "I told you to stay in the cellar," he growled, binding Dawson's hands with a length of rope. "You're welcome," she replied, offering him a hand up, which he reluctantly took. The fire was spreading quickly now, feeding on the dry hay and wooden structure. Together they dragged Dawson's unconscious form outside, where Diego and several ranch hands were already organizing a bucket brigade to fight the house fire. In the chaotic hours that followed, Clara worked alongside everyone else to save what they could. The house was partially salvaged, though the front rooms were completely destroyed. The barn was a total loss, but miraculously, all the animals had been freed in time. 3 of Dawson's men were dead. The rest, including Dawson himself, were secured in a storage shed under guard until the deputy sheriff could arrive from the next county. Dawn found Clara and Tucker sitting side by side on an upturned water trough, exhausted and soot-stained. A makeshift bandage wrapped Tucker's arm where he'd been grazed by a bullet, and another covered the knife cut on his cheek. "You could have been killed," he said finally, echoing her words from days earlier. "So could you?" She looked at his profile in the growing light. "You risked everything for me, a stranger, not such a stranger anymore." His voice was rough with fatigue, but something else colored his tone, a warmth that hadn't been there before. Clara felt her heart quicken. "No, I suppose not." He turned to face her fully. "The house can be rebuilt. But if anything had happened to you..." He trailed off, seeming surprised by his own admission. "Tucker," she said softly, "I don't want to go to Tucson." His blue eyes searched her face. "Why not?" "Because I think I'm already where I'm supposed to be." She gathered her courage and placed her hand over his. "If you'll have me." For the first time since she'd met him, Tucker Wallace smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his entire face. "I bought you once already," he said, his fingers intertwining with hers. "But I'd rather earn you if you'll give me the chance." Clara Sinclair leaned forward and pressed her lips gently to his, tasting smoke and promise. "I think that can be arranged, Mr. Wallace." 1 year later, Clara stood on the porch of the rebuilt Wallace Ranch house, watching a wagon approach along the dusty road. The past 12 months had brought more changes than she could have imagined on that stormy day in Casa Grande. Herbert Dawson had been sentenced to 20 years in territorial prison for murder, kidnapping, and illegal trafficking. His conviction had led to the breakup of several other slave trading operations throughout the Arizona Territory. Tucker had testified at the trial, bringing Clara with him to Phoenix, where she had bravely faced her former captor and told her story. During those weeks in Phoenix, their relationship had deepened beyond either's expectations. They were married by a circuit judge on a clear September morning, with Diego and Lucia as witnesses. The ranch hands had thrown an impromptu celebration that lasted well into the night, complete with a feast, dancing, and enough tequila to ensure many nursing headaches the following day. Now, as spring returned to the desert, Clara watched her husband riding escort alongside the approaching wagon. Within it were two passengers, a young Chinese man and a Mexican woman, the very same people who had been sold before Clara at Dawson's auction in Maricopa. Tucker had spent months tracking them down, working with sympathetic lawmen and contacts throughout the territory. 2 weeks ago, word had finally come that they had been located at a mining camp near the border, and Tucker had immediately set out to bring them to safety. As the wagon drew nearer, Clara descended the porch steps, her hand unconsciously moving to the slight swell of her belly, their first child, due in the fall. Tucker saw her waiting and spurred his horse ahead, dismounting in one fluid motion to gather her in his arms. "You found them," she whispered against his chest. "I promised I would." He kissed her forehead. "The man's name is Y. Chen. The woman is Rosalinda Fuentes. They've been through hell, but they're free now." Clara looked up at him, her heart full, just like us. Tucker's eyes softened as they always did when he looked at her these days. "Free to choose our own way," he agreed, his hand joining hers over their growing child. The wagon pulled into the yard, and Clara stepped forward to welcome the newcomers to Wallace Ranch, no longer just a cattle operation, but a sanctuary for those escaping bondage and a starting point for new lives. Already, 3 families lived in newly built cabins on the property, working the land alongside Tucker and learning ranching skills they could eventually use to establish their own homesteads. As twilight settled over the desert, Clara and Tucker sat together on their porch, watching Y and Rosalinda settle into the guest cabin across the yard. The sound of Diego's guitar drifted from the bunkhouse, accompanied by his eldest son's harmonica. "I never expected this life," Clara mused, leaning against her husband's shoulder. Tucker's arm tightened around her. "Neither did I. When I bought you that day, all I wanted was to get you away from Dawson. I never imagined that we'd build this together." She smiled up at him. "A storm brought me to you, Tucker Wallace. The lightning led me home." He lowered his lips to hers, a man who once bought a woman in a lightning storm, only to discover he'd actually found his own freedom in the process. And as the first stars appeared in the Arizona sky, Clara knew with absolute certainty that sometimes the darkest storms delivered the brightest futures.